If there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history, the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
I'm the developer of linguistic genomics, which was the first platform on which you could determine the intent of communication rather than the literal artifact of communication. But we've also used that technology for a number of other applications in defense and intelligence and finance, and most notably in the early 2000s, my company was responsible for bringing down what was at the time one of the largest tax frauds in US history. We maintained a series of inquiries into every individual, every organization, and every company that is involved in anything that either blurs the line of biological and chemical weapons or crosses that line in any of 168 countries. In 1999, there were 1 million patents digitized by IBM. And those 1 million patents were the first time human innovation had been put into an electronic digital searchable format. We took that information and we did a very simple exercise using our linguistic genomics technology, where I made the horrific assessment that approximately 1/3 of all patents filed in the United States were functional forgeries, meaning that while they had linguistic variations, they actually covered the same subject matter. In 1999, patents on coronavirus started showing up, and thus began the rabbit trail.
March 2003, panic grips Hong Kong as a deadly new virus sweeps through the city.
In 2003, the Center for Disease Control saw the possibility of a gold strike, and that was the coronavirus outbreak that happened in Asia. They saw that a virus they knew could be easily manipulated was something that was very valuable, and in 2003 they sought to patent it. And they made sure that they controlled the proprietary rights to the disease, to the virus, and to its detection, and all of the measurement of it. We know that Anthony Fauci, that Ralph Baric, that the Center for Disease Control, and the laundry list of people who wanted to take credit for inventing coronavirus were at the hub of this story. From 2003 to 2018, they controlled 100% of the cash flow that built the empire around the industrial complex of coronavirus.
The World Health Organization has officially named the novel coronavirus
the novel coronavirus outbreak.
The World Health Organization has declared
an international public health emergency.
While we know that the coronavirus manipulation started with Dr. Ralph Baric in 1999.
The major characteristics of SARS, MERS, and SARS coronavirus 2, it's a good way for you...
Ralph Baric is the researcher at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who's famous for his chimeric coronavirus research. In 2002, there was a recognition that the coronavirus was seen as an exploitable mechanism for both good and ill. On April the 25th, 2003, the U.S. Center for Disease Control filed a patent on the coronavirus transmitted to humans. Under 35 U.S. Code Section 101, nature is prohibited from being patented. Either SARS coronavirus was manufactured, therefore making a patent on it legal, or it was natural, therefore making a patent on it illegal. If it was manufactured, it was a violation of biological and chemical weapons, treaties, and laws. If it was natural, filing a patent on it was illegal. then either outcome, both are illegal. In the spring of 2007, the CDC filed a petition with the Patent Office to keep their application confidential and private. They actually filed patents on not only the virus, but they also filed patents on its detection and a kit to measure it. Because of that CDC patent, they had the ability to control who was authorized and who was not authorized to make independent inquiries into coronavirus. You cannot look at the virus, you cannot measure it, you cannot develop a test kit for it. And by ultimately receiving the patents that constrained anyone from using it, they had the means, they had the motive, and most of all, they had the monetary gain from turning coronavirus from a pathogen to profit.
Developing and owning a coronavirus vaccine has become a biotech arms race with political overtones.
This vaccine gold rush is starting to bother me. Gold rush. Let's keep that in mind.
And so somewhere between 2012 and 2013, something happened. The federal funding for research that was feeding into places like Harvard, Emory, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that funding suddenly became impaired by something that happened at the NIH, where the NIH got this little tiny moment of clarity and said, I think something we're doing is wrong. And in 2013, the NIH said, gain-of-function research on coronavirus should be suspended. The National Institutes of Health had a moral and social and potentially legal reason to object to research. But the letters that were sent to the researchers essentially said, you are receiving notice that we're telling you to stop. And now on the bottom of the page, we're going to clarify what stop means. Keep going. But when the heat gets hot in 2014 and 15, what do? You offshore the research. You fund the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do the stuff that sounds like it's getting a little edgy with respect to its morality and legality. But do you do it straight way? No. You run the money through a series of cover organizations to make it look like you're funding a U.S. operation, which then subcontracts with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The U.S. could say, China did it. China could say, the U.S. did it. And the cool thing is, both of them are almost telling the truth.
Where did the coronavirus come from? There is a new investigation into its origins. U.S. intelligence officials tell NBC News that they are examining whether the virus accidentally came from a Chinese lab.
Chinese officials pushing back against that claim on Thursday, tweeting that it might be the U.S. Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan.
I was the first person in the world to look at an epidemic and study its characteristics and prove that it was due to biological warfare and was not a natural occurrence. So I published that 28 years ago. Early in this pandemic, I did not think the coronavirus was a natural occurrence from bats. I feel quite convinced that this was a laboratory-designed organism. There have been hundreds and hundreds of leaks from high-containment laboratories that do research on pathogenic coronaviruses and other potentially lethal organisms.
You were quoted as saying, it was a meticulous job done professionally.
It could be done by somebody very expert in molecular biology, I think.
Et c'est pas naturel, c'est ce que vous voulez dire?
Non, ce n'est pas naturel, c'était un travail de professionnel, un travail de biologiste moléculaire. C'est un travail très minutieux, on peut dire d'horloger, on peut dire au niveau des séquences.
Mais dans quel but?
Dans quel but, ça, ce n'est pas clair. Moi, j'expose, si vous voulez, mon travail, c'est d'exposer les faits, c'est tout.
See, the problem with all of this is the evidence is right in front of our face. And when confronted with evidence, we are told fact checkers are somehow transcendent.
Several reports have popped up online claiming the virus was made in a lab. Our Verify team is taking a closer look to see if COVID-19 is a synthetic virus. Here's Matt Gregory.
Every day there's new information on the coronavirus pandemic, and it gets hard to sort through what's legit and what's fake. And that's why we have the Verify team, to get you the facts. This week we got an email from a viewer who said they saw a video that claims COVID-19 is not a natural virus, but a synthetic virus. So let's verify. Is there any evidence to suggest COVID-19 is a synthetic virus? Our sources for this are the CDC and Johns Hopkins University epidemiologist, Dr. David Dowdy. First thing we did was ask Dr. Dowdy, what is a synthetic virus?
A synthetic virus is a virus that's essentially man-made, right? So that people develop these in laboratories.
According to the CDC, scientists are still tracking down the origins of the novel coronavirus. But a majority of the scientific community says there is no evidence so far to prove it's been made in a laboratory. And Dr. Dowdy agrees.
No one, to our knowledge, has successfully designed a synthetic virus that could spread from person to person, sustained in a population, and then also released that virus.
Dowdy won't go as far as to say it's scientifically impossible, but based on all the information right now, the coronavirus does not appear to have been man-made. And based on the information from the CDC and Johns Hopkins University, we're labeling this false. There is no evidence to suggest COVID-19 is a synthetic virus.
Okay, well, as the pandemic continues, so too the questions of COVID-19's origins within the World Health Organization, set to restart its investigation into the outbreak.
Yes, in a new book and documentary, What Really Happened in Wuhan, journalist and author Shari Markson investigates the potential leak of the virus from the top-secret laboratory in China. We're going to speak to her in just a moment.
And Shari Markson joins us now from Sydney. Hi, Shari. Hope you're well.
Good
now, look,
morning,
I've read your
Susanna.
book.
Good morning, Alistair.
Nice to see you. I read your book last night, and there's sort of two things that really, really interested me. One was the kind of chaos around Trump, and I think we saw a little bit of the evidence of that there, and also the fact that he started off saying how wonderful the Chinese were handling it, then he went to the position that he adopted there. But then the other thing that really, really, really struck me was this sense of anybody who was even suggesting that there might have been some kind of conspiracy, some kind of cover-up, was kind of just being, not just cancelled, but in some cases disappeared. Now, where did you end up in terms of who to believe and what to believe about the whole story of whether this thing came from the lab?
So I started investigating this around March, April last year, and I've interviewed scientists, whistleblowers from Wuhan, Chinese defectors, intelligence officials, and politicians like the former President and Secretary of State to try and unravel and unpick what has happened. Because early last year, we saw that this idea that the virus might have accidentally leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, it was dismissed as a conspiracy theory. And like you say, Alistair, anyone who said that there was evidence for this, including established credible scientists, were treated despicably. Their research was blocked from being published in scientific journals. And it's taken almost 21 months for us to unravel and unpick all of this and see what happened is that there was a cover-up, not just in the Chinese Communist Party, but there was a cover-up in the West as well, where this has not been properly investigated, and it needs to be, because we've had 4.7 million people die of COVID-19 so far, and the whole world has been turned upside down.
Shari, one of the things that you look into is what actually was going on within that Institute for Virology, and there's quite a controversial technique, isn't there, that they're allegedly doing, which is gain of function. There's a Republican senator who calls it juicing up super viruses. Now, this is controversial because of who's funding it, but what did you discover about what gain of function is and how it might have contributed to what happened?
So gain-of-function research is basically when scientists genetically alter a virus to give it new functions. So it might gain the ability to infect humans or to become, say, airborne when it wasn't able to do that before. So basically what you have is the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which houses the world's largest collection of coronaviruses, was creating brand new viruses, even more deadly, that had never existed in nature before. And they were also genetically altering other coronaviruses. In fact, I did an analysis with my research team for the book of all of their scientific papers, and we discovered that there were 60 that were funded with American research, and that's there in black and white. This can't be denied. It says at the end, funded with the NIH or other agencies. And that's where Anthony Fauci comes into this, because his agency was funding the research. He knew personally Peter Daszak, with whom the subgrant was going through. He's a scientist. And yet, when the pandemic broke out, Anthony Fauci was sitting in all of the Oval Office conversations, and I've interviewed pretty much everyone who was in that room, including the former president, and they all said that Anthony Fauci kept silent. He didn't tell anyone what this Wuhan lab was doing. People had to figure it out for themselves.
Friday, January 31st, 2020 at 10:32 p.m., Dr. Fauci gets an email from Christian Anderson. Christian Anderson's a British researcher who's received numerous grants from NIH. Two really important sentences are in that email. Two sentences that get Dr. Fauci's attention. The first is this: the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome. So one has to look really closely at all the sequences to see that some of the features look engineered. Again, this is January 31st, 2020. Second sentence: Eddie, Bob, Mike, and myself all find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. Email arrives 10:32 to Dr. Fauci on January 31st, 2020. 2 hours later at 12:29 in the morning, Dr. Fauci sends an email to his top deputy, Mr. Hugh Auchincloss. Guys worked for Fauci for 15 years, part of his inner circle. Sends it, subject line says important in all capital letters. He attaches a paper on gain-of-function research written by Dr. Barrick and Dr. Shi. Dr. Shi, of course, is the so-called Bat Lady, Batwoman, the lady who does research in the Wuhan, China lab. This email, Dr. Fauci says, again, to his top deputy, it is essential that we speak this AM. Keep your cell phone on, read this paper. You will have tasks to do today that must be done. Notice the intensity. Notice the focus. I mean, this is the house is on fire email here. Now, 2 hours after that, at 2:48 in the morning, Dr. Fauci's busy this morning. 12:29, that email he sent to Dr. Auchincloss, his top deputy. 2 hours later at 2:48 in the morning, he sends another email, this one to Robert Kadlec, Assistant HHS Secretary, Trump appointee, not part of his inner circle, and he attaches a different article to this email, one that says the virus came from an animal, that downplays any lab leak theory. Now, again, notice the tone of this one. Bob, this just came out today. Gives a balanced view, best, Tony. I mean, totally different from the previous. This is one like, oh, if you get a chance, read this, gives a balanced view. So the tone is different, but also that sentence, gives a balanced view, it's not true either. That's just not accurate. This article downplays, as I said, the lab leak theory, emphasizes evolutionary cause to the virus. What happens next? What happens next? Later that same morning at 11:47 a.m., Dr. Fauci's deputy gets back to him. I just want to read you this whole email. The paper you sent me, the one he sent him on, that was written by the virologist from Wuhan, China, and Dr. Barrick, the paper you sent me says the experiments were performed before the gain-of-function pause, but have since been reviewed and approved by NIH. Not sure what that means, since Emily, someone else who works for Dr. Fauci, is sure that no coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework, which of course is the oversight body that's supposed to approve any grant dollars going for gain-of-function research. No coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework. Final sentence, she will try to determine if we have any distant ties to this work abroad. She will try to determine if our fingerprints are on any of this. All these emails happen in 13 hours. So 13 hours after Dr. Fauci gets the initial email from Christian Anderson saying, looks like this virus is engineered, not consistent with evolutionary theory, Dr. Fauci knows some important facts. First, Dr. Fauci knows there's a lethal virus on the loose that started in Wuhan, China. Second, he knows the American taxpayers have funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. Third, he knows that the research grant didn't go through the required oversight board. Fourth, he knows the virus, quote, looks engineered and, quote, not consistent with evolutionary theory. And finally, fifth, Dr. Fauci knows he may have ties to this work in China. His fingerprints, in fact, may be on this. So what does Dr. Fauci do next? After he says, oh, whatever, what does he do next? He organizes a conference call for later that same day. I mean, this is the busiest 24 hours I think I've ever. He organizes a conference call, 12 people on the call. Dr. Fauci and 11 virologists from around the world. Virologists who've gotten millions of American tax dollars over the past several years. Now look at this list. Here's the list of people. There's only 2 Americans on the list, Tony Fauci and one other. Most of them are from around the world, as I said. I think the first thing you notice is who's not on the call. Who's not on the list? Is Dr. Kadlik on the list? The guy he sent the email to at 3 in the morning? Is Dr. Redfield the head of CDC? Dr. Giroir, who's with us today, Assistant Secretary at HHS at the time? Dr. Birx, the lady who's soon to be COVID response coordinator? In fact, there's no one from the government on the call except Tony Fauci. Tony Fauci and 11 other individuals who got a bunch of American tax dollars over the years. What happened on the conference call? The short answer is we don't know. We don't know what they talked about. I mean, I think we got a good idea. We don't know for sure, but we do know what happened 4 days later. 4 days later, February 4th, 2020, Christian Anderson, the guy who started it all, who said the virus looks engineered, Christian Anderson said this 4 days later. The crackpot theories going around at the moment relate to this virus being somehow engineered. That is demonstrably false, close quote. What? In 4 days, this guy went from this looks engineered to now that's demonstrably false. 4 days, he went from this isn't consistent with evolutionary theory. Now we know it's totally evolutionary. But it gets even better. It gets even better. Mr. Anderson and 3 of the other people on this call write an article a few weeks later that says COVID is not a laboratory construct. And while they're writing that article, there's an email from March 6 where Mr. Anderson offers to let Dr. Fauci edit the article before it's published. And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. When the article is published, Dr. Fauci cites it at a White House press conference when he is asked by a reporter about the origin of the virus. Cites the very article he put in motion on the conference call, and he was allowed to edit. At the White House, where he's supposed to be giving the American people the truth, he references an article that he manufactured.
I was particularly interested in a paper that came out in Nature Medicine by 5 scientists claiming, and it was definitely a natural occurrence rather than a lab construct. But the arguments they used did not hold water. They didn't really make a lot of scientific sense. And yet all kinds of very important people started parroting what this paper said. And so that, of course, got me scratching my head saying, why are these people risking their reputation when it's obviously illogical, doesn't hold water? Somebody must have made them publish this, and somebody must have told these other people that they have to say it's a great piece of science.
Fauci, I don't expect you today to admit that you approved of NIH funding for gain-of-function research in Wuhan, but your repeated denials have worn thin, and a majority of Americans, frankly, don't believe you. Even the NIH now admits that EcoHealth Alliance did perform experiments in Wuhan that created viruses not found in nature that actually did gain in lethality. The facts are clear. The NIH did fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, despite your protestations. You can deny it all you want, but even the Chinese authors of the paper, in their paper, admit that viruses not found in nature were created, and yes, they gained in infectivity. Your persistent denials, though, are not simply a stain on your reputation, but are a clear and present danger to the country and to the world. As Professor Kevin Esfelt of MIT has written, gain-of-function research looks like a gamble that civilization can't afford to risk. And yet here we are again, with you steadfast in your denials. Why does it matter? Because gain-of-function research with laboratory-created viruses not found in nature could cause a pandemic even worse the next time. We're suffering today from one that has a mortality of approximately 1%. They're experimenting with viruses that have mortalities of between 15 and 50%. Yes, our civilization could be at risk from one of these viruses. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with known pandemic-causing viruses are incredibly risky. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with coronaviruses that have as much as 50% mortality could endanger civilization as we know it. And here you sit, unwilling to accept any responsibility for the current pandemic and unwilling to take any steps to prevent gain-of-function research from possibly unleashing an even more deadly virus. You mislead the public by saying that the published viruses could not be COVID. Well, exactly no one is alleging that. No one is alleging that the published viruses by the Chinese are COVID. What we are saying is that this was risky type of research, gain-of-function research. It was risky to share this with the Chinese, and that COVID may have been created from a not yet revealed virus. We don't anticipate the Chinese are going to reveal the virus if it came from their lab. You know that, but you continue to mislead. You continue to support NIH money going to Wuhan. You continue to say you trust the Chinese scientists. You appear to have learned nothing from this pandemic. Will you today finally take some responsibility for funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan?